Section 8 has changed recently, and we landlords, we just have to do better about a lot of things, about our processes. In the last video, I talked a lot about what those changes were in detail, what's happening, and two people brought up some questions that made me really think that these are worth addressing. One is, are we charging the right amount of rent to begin with? Two is, if these changes are going on, how are we changing how we do background checks? So I want to address both those things today. I'm Monique Burns. I am currently in the dog park. There's my dog Annie, and it is a snow day today, and it's just beautiful and it's quiet back here. My husband and I have been buying houses in Detroit since 2007. Right now we are in the business of buying distressed properties, renovating them, and selling them to investors from all over the country and all over the world. If that is something you are interested in, we're selling them for around $90,000. If you want to talk to me about that, here's my link to Calendly. Let's get into it. What I talked about last week was that you're getting one of two kind of deals out of Section 8 right now. If you're getting a tenant for kind of above market rent, kind of market rent, but above, it's great. We're all excited, like, yay, we're getting great rent. But then you have to ask, how much does the tenant have to pay? And what Section 8 is doing now is they're making the tenants pay a big majority of it. Supposedly it's 40 to 42% of the tenant's income if the rent is at that more market plus or above market rent. And you have to ask yourself, do I really want to go through all the paperwork and the inspection to have a Section 8 tenant if I'm also going to have to do collecting on this tenant? It's like not like it used to be where, great, I got a Section 8 tenant and Section 8 is paying most of it. You know, even back then when it was 30 to 40%, it was never most of the rent. I don't know. They say they're using the same percentage, but instead of 30, maybe they've gone to 40 or something. But it's like the trend right now is the tenants are covering the difference quite significantly. I still would prefer Section 8 because if anything goes wrong with the tenant, like they lose their job, they still have the voucher and the voucher will kick in and pay the rent. So I'm still sticking with it. Can't say I like it. The other thing that's happening is you could get a tenant who, hey, if you are liking this video, it is super helpful to me. If you push that subscribe button, it keeps me going so much. Thank you. Where Section 8 is going to pay 100%, but then Section 8's like, but your rent has to be a couple hundred below market. Or is it really at market? I don't know. So you have to be like, okay, well, like, do I want a 100% tenant and they're paying this really low rent? I don't know. So that leads me to one comment that I got last week about this subject was, why are you so greedy? And I had to think about that, and I thought, you know what? I'm not. On my own properties, my tenants are all kind of below market because they've been there so long, and it's hard for me to be like, yeah, market rent's this now, and try to raise the rent knowing full well that they're already struggling. I mean, I don't do that with my own properties, but I'm in the business of flipping houses and I work with buyers and I'm trying to get them the most possible rent. So my head is more at that because I've had my properties for a while now, is like, okay, how can I get the most rent? But I don't know, is that wise? Is that not wise for the new buyers to try to get this above market if the tenant's going to come up with most of the rent anyway? So that was one of the comments. The other comment came from one of my loyal followers, Fabio. Thank you, Fabio. He always says such nice things on all my videos. He wondered if we could change how we're doing the background checks, because if the tenant is coming up with that much rent, do we need to be doing something differently? So I can't remember how I answered him, but I haven't quit thinking about it since he wrote that. And here are my thoughts on that subject. First of all, we are bound by fair housing rules. So according to fair housing, you treat everyone the same. You can't like make different qualifications for different people. And I did talk to the guy that has been finding tenants for me lately. And I asked him, he and I have been discussing this, like what do we do differently? Because if they're coming up with a lot more of the rent, it seems like we better get better. Oh, I hear dogs. We better get better ourselves at what we're doing. So one of the things that he just started doing is saying that when a tenant applies, they have to put their whole ledger from their prior landlord in there. Like, well, that's good and all, but their ledger is not going to show that high a rent, because this is a new trend of Section 8 making tenants pay this really almost the entire rent. So it's not like there's going to be a real history of a tenant having paid that higher rent ever in their lives, and especially if they're kind of newer to Section 8, because these high rents are happening when tenants move, not where they're at now, like all my tenants, right? So the question then comes to, so what do you do? And you just look at the payment history. And a real ledger, they're not going to be perfect. Most tenants pay late sometimes. Things happen in their lives. You know, do they pay the whole thing? Are they always carrying a balance? I mean, that's something we have to pay a lot more attention to. And I have to say, before, when Section 8 was paying most of it, it wasn't so much of a focus for me. Like when they're paying, like if my tenant only had to come up with $80 a month or something, I wasn't like, I got to see that ledger as hardcore. I should have, but I can't say I was that good at it. So now that's really important. But the other thing he told me about is this software. I had something similar to this when I had a property management company. And I was really good with this too, but this new software sounds even better. And it's called Forewarn. And he said, you just put in the tenant's phone number and all this information shows up. And what shows up is every last place the tenant has ever lived. Because on an application, a tenant is not going to tell you about all the houses they got evicted from. They're just not revealing all that. So in Detroit, it's nice when you look up a tenant's eviction history, which is something you should always be doing, something I've always done. It's something I've always relied on the most, besides going to their house and seeing how they lived, but I would look at their history. So Detroit is great that way, sort of, but not really anymore, because now in Detroit, they just start expunging the tenants' names from the eviction. So it's like you don't actually know if your tenant has been evicted. But with Forewarn, it shows all the cities that they lived in. And some of these little podunk towns, you have to call them because they're not online, like big old Detroit's online. And you call them and you say, so what records do you have with this name? And that's public record. They're supposed to tell you, oh yeah, she's a regular in our jail, but they're supposed to tell you that, not just the landlord. When I call, I don't ever say, what are the landlord tenant ones? I want to know all of them. So that's another great thing to do. And it really shows you a lot of information on there of all their relatives and everything. And he said when he applied to get the software Forewarn, which I guess is $25 a month, they asked this question, are you an individual or like doing it as a real estate agent or doing it as a property manager? For some reason, he said individual. And they wrote back and they said, oh, you're clearly just a looky-loo, nosy neighbor who wants to look up all your exes. So no, you can't have the software. I'm kidding. They didn't say that. But they just ignored him. So then later he applied and said property manager, which was more accurate. And they gave him access to the software. But it is $25 a month, but it's well worth it. I mean, we can't leave any stone unturned anymore, because it's not like we're able to rely on Section 8 as much as we used to. We just don't even know what the future holds with it anyway. Anything we can do to find out how responsible of a person is that tenant, besides like the regular stuff, calling their employer or looking up their eviction history. And what I always say is checking out how they live. But checking out how they live isn't enough. If they don't even have a ledger, you want to know how well they pay. You're not going to see that when you go to their house. So that's what I've got for you today. I hope you appreciate that. Thank you so much for watching.